In mainstream Islam, repentance is direct. No priest, no confession booth, no representative, no payment. A believer turns to Allah alone, admits their sin privately, feels sincere remorse, stops the wrongdoing, and resolves not to return to it. This is the Islamic concept of Tawbah. But one of the major theological differences between mainstream Sunni Islam, Twelver Shia Islam, and the Nizari Ismaili tradition concerns how repentance and forgiveness are understood in religious practice. In mainstream Islam, private sins are not meant to be exposed unnecessarily. A Muslim is encouraged to conceal their own sins, seek forgiveness directly from Allah, and avoid turning repentance into a public or ritual confession before another human being. The principle behind this is known as Satr al-Aib, or concealing faults. The Prophet Muhammad taught that whoever covers the faults of a Muslim, Allah will cover his faults on the day of resurrection. This teaching is understood to mean that Muslims should not expose the sins of others, and they should also avoid exposing their own private sins when Allah has already concealed them. So from the mainstream Islamic perspective, repentance is simple and direct. You do not need a priest. You do not need a religious officer. You do not need an intermediary. You turn directly to Allah. This is where the difference with Aga Khan Nizari Ismailism becomes important. In the Nizari Ismaili tradition, religious life is centered around the spiritual authority of the living Imam. In the Jamatkhana, that authority is represented locally through figures such as the Mukhi and Kamadiya. One ritual often discussed in this context is known as Dua Karavi. In this ritual, a murid or follower may approach the Mukhi with an offering, kneel and recite phrases of repentance such as Tobo Tobo or Bando Gunagar, expressing sorrow and seeking spiritual forgiveness or renewal. Ismailis may understand this practice through their doctrine of the Imam's spiritual authority and the representative role of the Mukhi. But from the perspective of mainstream Islam, the problem is clear: repentance should not pass through a human representative. Forgiveness belongs to Allah alone. No religious leader, no priestly figure, no institutional representative, and no community officer has the independent power to erase sins or grant absolution. Mainstream Muslims may therefore see rituals like Dua Karavi not as ordinary Islamic Tawbah, but as a form of mediated repentance that conflicts with the direct relationship between the believer and Allah. Another related practice is Chanta, in which consecrated water may be sprinkled on the face as part of a ritual of purification or forgiveness. Again, Ismailis may understand this symbolically within their own religious tradition, but from a mainstream Islamic viewpoint, the concern remains the same. Repentance is not supposed to depend on a ritual performed by a representative of religious authority. The issue becomes even more sensitive when financial offerings are involved. In many Jamatkhana practices, offerings are connected to religious rituals such as Dua Karavi, Niaz, Sukreet, and Dasond, which is commonly described as a contribution of 12.5% of income. Critics argue that this creates serious questions. Should repentance or spiritual renewal be connected to money? Should forgiveness be associated with offerings? And should religious contributions be collected without full public transparency about how funds are managed and used? For mainstream Muslims, the central theological objection is not complicated. Allah alone forgives sins. A believer does not need to confess private sins before a Mukhi. A believer does not need a representative of the Imam to seek forgiveness. A believer does not need a ritual payment to return to Allah. Sincere Tawbah is between the servant and the Creator. This is why many mainstream Muslims view Ismaili practices, such as Dua Karavi and Chanta, as fundamentally different from Islamic repentance as taught in Sunni and Twelver Shia traditions. The central question is simple: should repentance be a direct act between you and Allah, or can it be mediated through a religious office, a ritual representative, and financial offering? For those who want to research this issue further, compare mainstream Islamic teachings on Tawbah and Satr al-Aib with Ismaili explanations of the Imam, the Mukhi, Dua Karavi, Chanta, Niaz, Sukreet, and Dasond. For more information from a critical perspective, you can visit Rethinking Ismailism and Inside Ismailis.